This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, and today we have a special guest jumping aboard. You guys have heard all my draft thoughts. We've gone through some mock draft exercises. I figured I'd go right to the source here, and today I will have Steve Shoup, the founder of FanSpeak.com, joining us to be able to walk through another mock draft exercise with a little bit of outside influence and an objective view of where someone that's not in the Bills Mafia sphere sees where the Bills draft needs are. Steve, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well. Love being on the show. Thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to talking some Bills.
Awesome. Before we dive in, anybody who's listening, give us a rating, give us a review. Check us out where you're going. Tell a neighbor, tell a friend what's happening with it. Come and join us over at cover1.net. Awesome draft breakdowns. Eric just did a fantastic video breakdown this morning with Courtney Davis from Texas A&M, just kind of going through route combinations. Talked about the signing of Evan Baum yesterday and going through just breakdowns of everything that's there. As we get closer to the draft, we're going to be doing a live Zoom draft party to be able to kind of hang out and watch the draft together and talk through it. So come on over, take a look. Right now it's only $10 to join as a premium member. Super easy way to be able to dive in and join the community. But without further ado, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to this point? I know we had a chance to meet when we were down there at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, but how did you end up creating FanSpeak and getting to this point?
So I've always been a major football fan. I wrote in both high school and college for the sports newspapers and did some other things with that and got into doing some other blogging after that. And I just really enjoyed it and wanted to do something in this space. And so, first we just had FanSpeak, and it's just a basic sports site. And then I've always had the passion for the NFL, and especially the draft, the off season. When I simulate Madden seasons, I barely play the season and just do the off season. And the big thing is, of course, mock drafts. And I think mock drafts are useful. I mean, people get so hyped up on the realism and all that. And there's some fair criticisms there, but for me, mock drafts are about creating plausible scenarios, not necessarily getting the 100% accuracy, but creating plausible scenarios to see what happens when this happens in front of you, or what happens when you do this in the first round, what are you going to then do in the second, third round, et cetera. So, so in that vein, I was looking at what we could do to create these plausible scenarios and came up with the idea of the simulator. That way you could do your picks and you could get an idea of who might be falling in the second round, who might slide to the third round. And of course, you run different scenarios. It's going to change each time. It's not going to be the exact same simulation. And because that's what you want. You don't want it to be the same simulation. You want to get sure, if you do enough of them, the same players might be there most of the time, but they won't be there all the time. So it just gives you a feel of what could happen, and also then allows you to learn and understand about some of these players who maybe weren't on your radar to start. So that was our goal, and that's been our kind of mission statement with this simulator and these tools.
No, I think that's awesome. And that's exactly how I describe my experience with them. I know some people get into kind of a prediction accuracy game, and whether people who are touting that are crazy, because even the best people aren't all that accurate. It's just impossible. The number of, last year, as soon as Cleveland Farrell goes number 4, most of the mock drafts are out the window. It's just not that possible. But I use it. And on the opposite side of that, the people who then dismiss the value of mock drafts because, it's not going to be that accurate anyways. I said, well, if that's your goal going in, then you're right. That doesn't have much value. I said, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not posting mock drafts online to followers and to people that are involved because I want to say, hey, look what I predicted. It's exactly like you said, hey, check out this scenario. What if we ended up going guard with our first pick? That's not a real common pick, but hey, here's how it fell. Here's who you were still able to get after that. Or hey, what do we do if there's a weird position that's not a need on the roster, but just an undeniable value drops? What if Patrick Queen falls to 54? What do we do? Do we all of a sudden say, hey, sorry, we already have good linebackers, we don't want that? Or do you figure out a way to make it work? And I think that's a healthy way to do it. And we'll get into that today. As I go and share my screen here, I'm going to bring up fanspeak.com, and I am a proud premium member, so I'm all logged in and set up. For anyone who's not familiar, this is what the site looks like. This is the on-the-clock simulator, the portion that I use. They actually have an ultimate GM tool as well that is a lot of fun, where you can get into actually signing free agents and doing an entire offseason. As we go through here, I'm going to pick the Bills, and there's a couple questions I'm going to ping you with as we go, just out of curiosity of how you set up the logic. So one of my favorite parts, obviously, we're going to do all 7 rounds here. We can keep it moving pretty quick. I love this portion here. I love the idea that you have an option of draft board. So one, anybody who's on here, you can build your own. So that takes a long time. And I know some other sites do similar things, where if you do enough of these, you can start to get to an idea of who you like where and where you want them to go. But you can also play around, and you're going to see a lot of names and a lot of sites that you recognize, and maybe some that you don't, that are going to be on there of who you think could be a good lens to view it through. So obviously today we'll use Steve's board. It's updated as of today, so I think that's going to be a great way to view it. But a lot of other areas on here, you see a lot of other sites that you're going to recognize that are good, and I think that's really healthy. On here, my logic is always to do random, because I don't want the other teams to be picking in the same order that I am, because I think that's much closer to realism. That I think fans underestimate how much variance there is in the 32 boards across the league. So I think that's a good way to view it. And is that why you set it up that way?
Absolutely. And, I think that brings another point you were saying about the accuracy, and going back to the Farrell pick last year, or, guys who just every year there's going to be a couple players who fall, who, whether the draft analyst you're looking at is Mel Kiper or Daniel Jeremiah or Matt Miller or any and all the above, there's going to be variances. And so that's why we want a variety of big boards, because one, maybe you feel more closely akin to. And then this option allows you to still mix it up for the other teams. Now, sometimes it can actually pick the big board you pick, but, that just shows, like some teams will be using that big board potentially. But we do have so many options that is lessened a little bit now this late in the draft process.
Well, and I think that it's, obviously you can't predict some off-field things like, Reuben Foster's year, Laramie Tunsil, things like that, or some of the more unexplainable ones like a DK Metcalf, where there was some, logic of why people were there, or some of the medical things like Maurice Hurst. There's always guys that just everybody's staring at the board saying, hey, why is this guy still here? What's going on? And all of a sudden it just turns out that's the way that it netted out that year. What do you have said as some of the differences in the difficulty level?
So, with premium, there is the extra layer that the trade offers in terms of what you offer other teams, how they'll value it. There is some difference there between classic and difficult. But the main thing is it changes the weighting of the needs versus the big board that you selected.
Interesting. Okay.
Or the big boards that the other teams are using.
And then obviously that gets into the team needs, where you have the user voted ones where you're able to bring in what their fans think. And then you obviously have a baseline for it. We'll use your logic here going through today's exercise. So to get everybody ready, we're going to do a 7-round mock draft. We have Steve's big board and his draft needs. We're going to use obviously the official order that's in place. We're going to get offered trades. We won't do any today. We'll maybe talk about where they're there. That can really get things crazy when you start getting into the trades. But I will say you get some interesting ones on the machine here that people throw you stuff leading into the pick, leading into the round, and then leading into the pick that, sometimes I've stopped and be like, man, that would be tough to turn down if someone offered that. And it can make for good dialogue of how Brandon Beane or any other GM is going to be facing it, where, hey, there's a guy we really like on the board here. And then all of a sudden your phone rings and say, oh, wow, that's more than what we expected. Those are the kind of decisions that GMs are making while on the clock and in real time, that, hey, do we roll the dice that we can move down a little bit and still get our guy versus just taking the bird in the hand. So without further ado, let's dive right in. All right. We've got the machine up and running here. Obviously, the Bills in the first round selected Stephon Diggs.
That's a pretty good pick.
Yeah, I think it's going to turn out well. So, we'll let it run through here. I'm just going to scroll through and look if I see any, big surprises. I think just about everybody's going where they are. Javon Kinlaw's the guy that I've been happy to see rising, and getting more consensus in the top range. That I think he's just a game-wrecking presence.
After the Senior Bowl, I was pretty much locked in as him as a top 15 guy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things Bills fans are interested in, and we see a couple names here that I think are interesting to look towards the end of the first. You did see a run on cornerbacks with Trevon Diggs, C.J. Henderson, Jeff Gladney, Damon Arnett, all going there. I think that once you get into the beginning part of the second round, you're going to have, the idea of Brandon Beane looking, did Yetur Gross-Matos fall? Did Claiborne Chason fall? Did even maybe AJ Epinesa, Zach Bond? You saw a lot of these guys in that cornerback and edge market that, they're valuable positions for a reason. I think it's very likely you're going to see those guys go in the spots that they went here. And those are the kind of names that Brandon Beane has shown a propensity to want to move up and see where those picks are. But a lot of the standard guys here that we've seen on a lot of boards are there. I'm going to start the round. We'll start looking to see who we have coming up at pick 54. So Xavier McKinney still sitting there. A lot of the top end running backs. Swift just went. Dobbins still there. I think interior line is a name that's coming up more with Bills fans recently, with John Feliciano and Spencer Long, and now recently signed Evan Baum, all expiring contracts this year. But we're now up at pick 54. Give us a thought process of where you'd be looking from the outside in as a Bills GM.
So to me, I look at the Bills and I'm looking at this as utilizing this time with Josh Allen's contract to build around him as much as possible. And I think the Bills have done a good job with that. Obviously, last year adding like John Brown and Beasley, this year with Stephon Diggs move. I like Dawson Knox and Singletary is fine also. But I look at this as you have a couple special running backs still on the board, and I would probably lean Jonathan Taylor here. I think he is the best fit for how the Bills are going to win with Josh Allen. A running back who can do a lot, who has game-breaking ability, and him and Singletary give them a 1-2 punch that, with a wide-open AFC East, I think the Bills are going to be a team with that defense. They get a lot of leads, and now they can just run out the clock. And I think Jonathan Taylor would be my pick. But I do like some of the D linemen who are there. Some of the interior offensive linemen are definitely intriguing. Wide receiver, tight end, I just wouldn't go there at this point. There are a few edges that are I maybe consider, but I think you could probably wait till the third round and still get a pretty decent guy there. But for me, these top four running backs, if I have a shot at one of them, I want them. I think there's a nice gap between the top four, the Swift, Dobbins, Taylor, and Hilaire Edwards. So if I'm getting a shot at one of those, I think from the Bills' perspective and where they are as a team, that's where I'm going. And I like Jonathan Taylor more specifically for the Bills.
I really like that logic. Eric and I have been talking about it a lot lately that, this is where you get into the tier of talent and the fit, and that, I can see people who might have DeAndre Swift rated first. I can understand why people would have Dobbins rated first. I understand why people have Edwards-Hilaire rated first. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a slightly better fit with Taylor or Edwards-Hilaire than with Swift or Dobbins, although I'd be happy with any of them. Yeah. That I think if multiple are on the board, I think that there's some logic of why Taylor may be a fit there. And that size and game-breaking speed added with the nuance and the contact balance and the vision that Singletary has, I think really bring a lot to the table. So I like that pick. Again, there are some other people. I do think that Isaiah Wilson would be on the table. I think Jeremy Chin would be on the table. I think Aguara would be on the table. I think those are guys who would all, Jalen Johnson, I think would be considered. I think those are all guys that would get some consideration here, but I like the logic, and I think that that's right in line with what we may see from Brandon Beane. So our first pick, we took Jonathan Taylor, running back from Wisconsin. We'll let the roll through here. And now, as we're kind of getting into the next pick, what would the next position you'll be targeting and hoping falls here?
Well, I think, like you said, there's some things that they can do to round out their defense. I mean, their defense is obviously really good to begin with, but they could use some edge help. They could definitely use another corner and some safety help as well. So I would be happy targeting those positions. Offensive line, I don't think you can ever have enough offensive line, especially in today's league, and this is just such a strong offensive line group, particularly at tackle, but the guards and interior players are pretty good as well. So I wouldn't mind taking one early. But I would probably lean defense. I see Steve Charles is there. That's definitely somebody I have some interest in, and would consider, but I think with Ashton Davis there, that's a free safety that I like a lot. I think both Dantzler and Ujamuda, I'm terrible with pronouncing his name, so I do apologize.
I think it's Ojemudia, but that's what I've been saying for a while. I hope it's right.
Those are two guys that both really intrigue me. I like what they can do. I think they can be starters pretty much day one. There's not an edge here that really jumps off the board from what I can see. It looks like it got picked over ahead of the Bills pick here. And this could be the type of thing where you look at it and you say, maybe this is where we package a couple of later round picks to move up to the middle of the third round and have a shot at a Korwa or Jabari Zuniga from Florida. Those would be definitely intriguing options there. Or I saw Damian Lewis at guard. That'd be another guy I'd be targeting if you're moving up a little bit in this draft in the third round.
I think that's absolutely where, heck, even seeing Ross Blacklock fall all the way to 70, that's not a need for the Bills, but just that kind of talent. I think when you look at right here, 71, 72, 73, you still had a stretch of Aguara, Pert, Ogbenegene, Zuniga, Kareem, all those guys right here that I could see that being a spot where, you might be able to jump up from 86 up to 75 for a fifth round pick. It's not going to cost you a ton. I do think that's an area where it's very likely that Brandon Beane would trade up. And I do think, in my mind, someone like Aguara is worth moving up for. I'm a big fan of Jabari Zuniga. Heck, Jeremy Chin, even still being on the board that late, I think is a very likely one. I think that's later than where he may, and I think 84 would be very favorable if he were to go there. But that's a lot of guys that went in that last stretch there. And I do think the amount of depth that the Bills have built, it's unlikely that we see 7 picks made going into here. So I do think we see some of that movement. But with who's on the board here, I like a lot of the names you thought. I like Hunt from an interior standpoint. I'm a little bit higher on Ojemudia than Dantzler, but I think they both fit in the zone scheme. And some of the things people are talking about with Chin and Duggar and that, big nickel, versatile positionless defender, I think Ashton Davis is more in play with that than what some people think. He probably has a little bit more of that center fielder skill set than they do, but I think he has some flexibility to do that as well. Where would you go in this direction?
I think I'll lean towards the value here and take Ashton Davis. I just think the value is really there. I think safety thins out a little bit after the third round, where, you could probably hopefully find a guard or a corner in the next round. We'll obviously see what comes up with this simulation, but I do feel like this is where safety kind of thins out after, say, the top 100, 115 type picks.
And it's going to be interesting. You saw there with our pick of Taylor in the second, and here's some trades being offered, a couple to move up a little in the fourth, which aren't terrible, but we'll keep plugging along. My biggest fear is I think I have it as a top 5 running backs. I do include Akers in that group. And I think that depending on where it is, I think some people have a top 3 and then Edwards, Hilaire, and Akers. Some have Edwards, Hilaire firmly in that top group. My biggest fear is seeing the Bills take one of those running backs at 54 and then Edwards, Hilaire, or Akers is there in the third, and you look at who you could have got at maybe a more premium position. And I think that's a very real challenge of what being and other GMs are going to be facing is how do you balance that with where that talent may be? And, we were talking about some of the interior lineman value, and seeing a guy like Tyler Biadasz fall all the way here, I think is very intriguing. You look in some of the more traditional corner spots. Harrison Hand, I think, has a lot of value there. Troy Pride Jr., both could be solid fits. Kenny Wilkes and Alton Robinson. I think definitely some interesting options. Who are you looking at?
There are some good fits. Again, I think, and actually I was a little surprised that Burgess lasted this long at safety, but, I think I would pull the trigger on Biadasz. I think he slid. He didn't have as great of a senior year as a junior year, but I think, Wisconsin has a pretty strong track record of producing NFL quality offensive linemen. And, I know he's had some nagging injuries and things like that. I still think he's a talented guy. I think he can start both at guard and center if need be. And so I think he just gives them a lot of positional flexibility and versatility. Even if he's not starting as a rookie or year 2, he's your top backup at 3 positions. That adds huge value. So I like that pick there. And especially from the Bills' perspective, the worst thing that they could have happen is to lose an interior offensive lineman for, say the whole season or 8 games and not have a guy capable of filling that in. And then that impacting Taylor and Allen and everyone else on offense.
No, I think you're spot on. And like I mentioned, as we were kind of earlier in the show, not having any interior linemen under contract next year besides Quentin Spain and Mitch Morris. And Mitch Morris does have a concussion history that, adding somebody for the future there. And, I think we threw out some names earlier. I'm a big fan of John Simpson. Damian Lewis, I think, is there. Robert Hunt. But I think the flexibility of somebody like Biadasz or either Lloyd Cushenberry, guys like that who maybe played more center but can also play guard, you have the luxury. I really like the idea of Tyler Biadasz in being able to use the medical facilities that the Bills have built that have really been able to help guys get right, not having to force them out of the field year 1, be able to bring them along. And then all of a sudden you have that nice security blanket to let John Feliciano go into free agency and just plug and play with a guy on a rookie contract. Plus you maintain the flexibility. Right now, John Feliciano's both our starting right guard and our backup center. Yeah. Honestly, Biadasz would be the exact same thing. He'd be the starting right guard and Mitch Morris's backup, and you just have another guy you could plug in if, God forbid, something happened to Morris. So I like that. So far, the Bills have selected Jonathan Taylor, safety Ashton Davis out of California, Tyler Biadasz, the interior lineman out of Wisconsin, and we are now on the board in the 5th round. We don't have an edge yet. We don't have a corner yet. No outside offensive line, no wide receiver. Where are you looking so far?
Well, first, before we get to the pick, I think this does show kind of where using this 5th rounder to jump up in the 3rd could have a lot of value, because you're seeing here at a board, and obviously it could be different come, Saturday, the NFL draft, but there's not a great fit here with, say, the top 10, 15 guys on the board. Some receivers fell. That's not a huge priority. Some running backs, but obviously you've already hit that with Taylor. Some off-ball linebackers and interior offensive linemen, but not guys who have the same value as Biadasz. So probably what I go from this board is Kobe Parkinson. I think adding another tight end can help. I think it allows the Bills to just be creative with their sets. I think, I think we know that the Bills are going to like to have some run-heavy sets. But also he's a tight end who can, who offers size, who offers some catching ability. And I like him and Knox as the Bills tandem going forward in years to come. I think as a rookie, he's going to be limited in what he can do, but come his sophomore, his second year and forward, I think he could be a solid number 2 tight end.
I think with that ridiculous size, you're talking about a guy who has the potential, and especially bringing him in with a veteran like Lee Smith in the room, you're able to impart a lot of that blocking capability, but also have it set up that, he can be the guy to take over for that in the future. He's probably an upgrade over Tommy Sweeney. And you're able to then have the kind of the best of both worlds, that it might be a luxury depth guy that doesn't see the field a ton as a rookie, but really pays dividends when we get into that future, you going into 2021 and beyond. So again, now we've added a good balance. We got 3 offensive guys, 1 defensive guy. We got 2 picks here in the 6th round. So we got 3 picks left. And we're now looking at a similar board, a couple of names that are still there, but who's shouting out to you here?
Well, if you could jump to edge real quick, I just want to see. I know it's not one of the. I think I would take Trayvon Hill here.
Yeah.
I think he offers some situational edge ability. This might be a little early according to my board, but I think he's fine. Definitely fine at this spot.
Yeah, it's hard to argue value in the 6th round.
Yeah, so I think he definitely offers some situational pass rush to just give him some depth there.
And I think that's the kind of pick that, you're able to take a dart throw at. The Bills do have an incredibly deep defensive line, but on the edge, their 3 top guys are all going to be 30 or older going into this year. So you're basically saying, hey, we're going to bring in Trayvon Hill to compete with Darryl Johnson. Darryl Johnson was, a 7th rounder last year that showed some potential, but also, showed why he was a 7th round pick in stretches. And that, at this point, a 6th round pick versus a 7th round pick, both with upside, but no real lost investment. If they don't make the team, you're not terribly upset here that you're able to kind of take a dart throw kind of stab at it. So we've now added another defensive piece here. So we have a safety, we have an edge on offense, we have a running back, interior line, and tight end. We're at our 2nd 6th round pick here. Who's reaching out to you here?
I think I would take I see the comment Gibson, the wide receiver running back, and I love him. And he is very tempting at this point. So I think the value is definitely there for him.
Certainly not going to get any arguments for me. I've argued with people that he's much closer to a replacement for Isaiah McKenzie than he is for Frank Gore. But in the Bills offense, depending on what else happened here, you added Jonathan Taylor. Adding Antonio Gibson might let you free up 2 roster spots, because with a Jonathan Taylor there, Antonio Gibson could now be the replacement for both TJ Yeldon and Isaiah McKenzie, because he can play that jet sweep eye candy guy plus the 3rd down pass catching guy. And you just added 2 running backs who both run a 4.39. So, or offensive weapons who both run a 4.39. So certainly not going to be upset there.
Yeah, no, Antonio Gibson, and he's a guy who could easily get taken in the 4th round just because that team loves him because of that skill set. And if you have a game plan on how you're going to use Antonio Gibson and you really believe, I like him much more as a running back first, but obviously splitting out wide and doing all those things. But I just love the idea of linebackers trying to cover him out of the backfield. I don't think many can, and even safeties are going to struggle if they're in the box. So I really love his value as a 5th, 6th round guy.
Well, and even beyond that, I think people think of that and be like, oh, he's probably a, Darren Sproles, or he's probably a Tariq Cohen. And no, he's 6 foot 228 and thick. Like, he's no joke when he gets going full speed. That I think he brings a little bit more to the table there as potentially a more sustainable running back. Eric has been very careful to caution that there's a lot of projection when you're talking about a guy who had 33 carries, that, assuming that he's ready to be a running back is a lot. But in this scenario where we have a top 3 wide receiver set in Buffalo, you now have Devin Singletary and Jonathan Taylor. He's now a luxury toy for Brian Daboll to figure out, hey, how can we bring him in there? And I know in the chat here, we had someone else bring up, he may be able to let you free up the roster spot of Andre Roberts, because he may be able to be your primary returner as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And the other thing I would just say to him is I like him as running back and lining up as a running back, but He's a guy who shouldn't probably get more than like 50 carries in a year. And obviously this situation is perfect with Taylor and Singletary ahead of him. He's going to be a guy who's coming out of the backfield or lines up in the backfield, then splits out wide to kind of test the defense, those types of things. Obviously having him and like Taylor on the field at the same time, like you said, that just adds so much speed and potential to this offense, to an offense that already has speed and potential with guys like John Brown and Stephon Diggs. Good luck defense,
It's been so long since I've heard someone say that sentence about a Buffalo Bills offense. It's hard for me to process that's a possibility here, but I certainly like it. All right, with our final pick here, what's reaching out to you here? Where are some areas you might look besides just the top of the board here? I know you're not really drafting for need at this point because it's unlikely a seventh rounder is filling any need. What are the kind of things that you look for at a late round upside?
Well, and again, each team's different. And I think you brought up a great point about, are the Bills going to have 7 roster spots to add guys? And sure, like a 7th or 6th rounder, it's okay to draft somebody if you think they're probably going to be practice squad material. But you do risk, of course, them having a good preseason. Of course, this year's could be a little different in that regard, but and getting poached by somebody else. But
well, that Daryl Johnson's the exact example. Last year, I feel firmly they drafted him to be a practice squad stash for the year, and they just didn't want to haggle on the undrafted free agent market. And then all of a sudden, he had 3 sacks and a bunch of pressures in the preseason, and they got to cut down day, and it was like, oh, we can't expose him to waivers. I guess we got to figure this out. And that's a good, don't get me wrong, that's a good problem to have, but that's certainly the part of the game they're going to play, especially this year with that new 54th and 55th guy on the roster, where you can play that game of having, I believe you're allowed to bring a guy up for 2 games on the active roster and then hide them back on the practice squad without exposing them to waivers. So that's going to be an interesting game a lot of teams are going to play here.
Absolutely. That's going to be, that's going to help change it. And also the deeper practice squads.
Because bump into 12 and then 14 in 2 years.
Well, and that's the other thing is once you cut a player, sure, theoretically your practice squad is the best place for him, but he might look at the depth chart and say, hey, the Raiders or some other team is offering me a practice squad spot and they're really thin at whatever position you're talking about. One injury and I'm definitely there, So it's teams will have more practice squad opportunities to offer some guys that, it might make more sense for a player to jump to another team in that sort of situation. So what I'm really looking for is I do want to find a guy who I hope can at least have a shot at making the roster. I also am looking for special teams. I'm looking for guys who have some level of certainty. When we're talking 6th, 7th round, it's great to find the upside. It's great to find, of course, the Tom Brady's, the Stephon Diggs. And Diggs was a guy who I think you knew all along. He had a certainty level to his game. And, he just obviously exceeded that as well. But I want a guy who is not just like some big risk either on the field or off the field. I want a guy who can play and to fill a backup role, because as you talked about earlier, having these guys who maybe they're on the inactive roster every game this year, but next year they maybe bump up and they're your 4th corner, they're your swing tackle, your repetitive or 4th receiver, something like that. Somebody who will take that role on the cheap for a couple of years can definitely add value to a team. So that's kind of how I look at late round picks.
Reaching out to here.
Yeah, looking at this board, I do like a couple of the defensive linemen, both Coatney from Mississippi, Ajim from Arkansas, really impressed with the Senior Bowl week and a good East-West game. Another guy that sticks out to me is Casey Toohill from Stanford. He's got some pass rush ability. He's not a true edge, but he can, come in situationally. He can play off the ball, linebacker a little bit. I would just look at offensive tackle real quick. Nobody's in this top list, but, Victor Johnson from App State is a little intriguing. I have him under the drafted threshold of course. But again, you're looking for a guy who probably is going to be inactive this year, but maybe can bump up. Of this list, I think I'll go with the Gene. I really liked him Senior Bowl week, and I think he is a guy who will probably never be a starter, a full-time guy, but I think he just has such a hard work ethic and that mentality that he's going to be your, a guy rotational guy who through the course of the year, again, not probably as a rookie, but who's playing 300 good snaps for you, good solid snaps. I mean, he get exposed if you try and play him all game or rely on him too much, but gives you a good, cheap fourth, fifth defensive lineman type thing. And I think a reasonable guy to make the roster. And even if he's on your practice squad for a year, he might stick on it. And, going forward, I think can definitely move up the depth chart.
So this is awesome, Steve. Appreciate it. Take a look. Anybody who's out here, check out fanspeak.com. Check out Steve-O Speak on Twitter. What are your final thoughts on the draft here as we close out?
A little slightly disappointed not getting a corner. I do appreciate that as an area of need and concern for the Bills.
I agree, and I think that it really brings a lot of other things into play here, where whether it's corner or we didn't get a traditional wide receiver, I would use Antonio Gibson in that space, and I think that there's some other positions that Bills fans may have an idea that we absolutely have to get this guy or we absolutely have to get this position, and the reason Brandon Beane spent so much time and effort being able to fill all of these needs on the roster is to open it up for a true best player available view and being able to fill some of those needs where maybe Ashton Davis isn't a player that's on a ton of Bills fans roster, or Tyler Biadasz is a guy that, we're not viewing as an impact in 2020, but maybe he plays a huge role in 2021 and we're able to then step in for Feliciano and Long and Evan Baum and have that guy ready to go. I think this is the kind of team that could really make a lot of sense there. So, appreciate you coming in with an outside objective view and being able to share where we think these things are going to fit from a Bills, standpoint. And, all the guys listening here have heard plenty of my thoughts on where the roster is. So I thought it'd be great to be able to have you come on here. Make sure you guys are checking on fanspeak.com. Make sure you're checking out Steve-O Speaks at Steve-O Speaks on Twitter. It's been a lot of fun here being able to check this out. Awesome. Appreciate all you guys in the chat. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and